Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, I'm continuing my trek through the episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond. We're continuing the trek on through Season 6. We are now on Episode 16, Lucky Suit. Yes, as the title suggests, this is a review. This isn't a clickbait thing. This is not me trying to get views just because of the title. In case anyone's wondering, I have often on been getting comments about that. I got a couple back-to-back recently, which... this is just a little side tangent. How hard is it to know the difference between people putting up clips and someone actually reviewing the episodes? I'm just like, is reading comprehension really going down that far? And I think with that, I don't get why people get mad about it and try to say you're doing clickbait when you clearly mark the title. I mean, it's one thing if you mismark the title and make it look like it's clips and it's not, but if you actually are truthful about what it is and then they get mad, hey, that's on them. I've clicked on stuff I thought was one thing and then turned to be something, and then I'm like, oh, it's clearly marked. I don't get mad. Get glad. If you want to gain access to videos early and suggest topics for future videos, go the Patreon route. If you just want to do one-off support or one-off requests, go to PayPal route. Either way, your support is appreciated. Lucky Suit. Like I mentioned at the end of the previous episode, this was one of the first episodes I've watched. And I know you've heard me say that a handful of times by this point, but it's true, there's a lot of them. Now, as I started watching this show in the hiatus between this season, and actually between season 7 and season 8, excuse me, the newish episodes that they were showing a lot in rotation were from this season and then going into the beginning of the next season. I don't think it was until right before season 8 started that they started showing the end of season 7 in syndication. Now this one is one of the first ones I remember watching with my grandmother, and it's what, introduced me to some of the relationships in the show, particularly how Marie views her sons. And this is a good one too, because this one is a double Emmy winner. I know I haven't brought up the Emmy Awards in a while, but that's because most of the ones that won were either towards the very beginning or not coming up until now. Let's see. The only one that's passed that I should have brought this up in is one that, in retrospect, I'm surprised. But I'll say at least it won for something that it deserved to, and that, of course, is Raybert. The reason I say that is that the only thing that episode deserved to win anything for was not the writing category, it was the acting category. Which, of course, it won for Brad Garrett and his other performance for it, since it was supporting, because they get 2 nominations, apparently, was this episode. I'd say he definitely deserves it more for this episode. And, of course, Doris Roberts. This was also one of the episodes nominated that got her the Emmy, along with Marie Sculpture. And I'd say there's one moment in particular in this episode where she definitely earned that Emmy, and I'll go to it. With Brad Garrett, there's also one scene in particular, but it's all throughout. You could see him going throughout the whole range of emotions as the character. Now, the episode begins on what seems to be a typical day in the life of Barones. Robert walks in. You could tell the way that Brad is playing it that he has some exciting news to tell, despite the fact that his family's getting on him. Like, he tells him he has news, and of course they start off with the quips. Your blue ox came home. He puts it aside, and he tells him he just got a call from the FBI. Now, just saying it that way, a lot of things come up, like, what type of call from the FBI did you get? Is it going to be one of those calls that's going to lead to a FBI, open up, we have a warrant. Mr. Barone, please come out of here. Don't make this any harder. But no, it's not that type of call. It's the type of call that if you heard from the FBI, you'd want it because it's essentially a job offer. Well, in this case, an interview offer that could lead to a job offer. And it's because Robert's captain, which remember at this point he is a lieutenant, so his immediate superior, has connections at the FBI. What these connections are, they never mention, but I'm guessing he probably has friends that work at the bureau in that office. He might be friends with this Agent Garfield, played by Sam Anderson. They never really specify it, but it's enough to get him an interview. And considering we know, other than my little rant in Raybert, which you guys already know if you've gone this far, if not, see that episode for my thoughts on that. He is a highly decorated officer with not really much negative on his thing, other than the little hiccup when he left the department a little bit in confronting the attacker back in season 4. Now, Robert is really feeling high on this, like he wants to do it. Now, the little foreshadowing in here is that Marie mentions, I thought you were going to do your 20 years and then retire. But of course, Robert puts that aside. This is the FBI. It'd be like a whole new part of my life. Now, a funny thing about this is that you hear them do like a lot of little quips at Robert's expense in here. In the blooper reel, there's a lot more funny ones. And also, there's a couple moments where Brad actually fights back. But I'll get to them when it becomes evident. One of them is, in this part of the episode, Ray is doing his usual manhood jokes about Robert and Brad, just when he thought genitals couldn't be getting any smaller. And then when he walks out, in a world where you never thought you'd see an itty penis. Hold that in mind when we get to the next part. Now, in order to prepare himself for the interview, Robert's going to wear his lucky suit. Why it's his lucky suit they never elaborate on. I'm guessing it's the suit he wore when he got all of his other big important stuff happen. Which, if that's the case, it's a good thing he didn't wear that to his first wedding. That'd probably be an unlucky suit. But then again, you wear a tux to a wedding, I guess, unless you go to a courthouse or something. I don't know. I've never been as a groom. I was a ring boy once, and that was probably my first time wearing a tux. But that's a little different. As a kid, you don't really know the difference of all these things. Now, he's also having breakfast made by Marie, and she's ironing his stuff for him. Now, he's going to get some juice after putting on the jacket of his lucky suit, and there's a burn mark on the back. Now, Marie's trying to hide it, but Frank points it out, and Robert reacts the way you would expect. And this episode really shows that, especially by this point in the show's run, the chemistry between these actors is like that. Because the way that Brad and Doris feed off each other as mother and son throughout this whole conversation, it just adds to the comedic gold, and the timing is spot on. Now, the reason Marie says she burned it was by accident, because she was, ironing while watching TV, and something come on saying that Ray was going to be on the TV show, and she hadn't told him, and she's like, well, why should I hear on TV instead of him telling me? You burnt my lucky suit. I was distracted. You have to be distracted for quite a bit in order to do a burn like that, but I guess it's realistic that it's enough time. Now, with everything, the episode never clarifies whether it's an accident or intentional, but given what Marie does later, I'd say more likely it probably was a little intentional. But it also could have been an accident that, with everything, you can definitely word it as being intentional, or that she's not sorry about doing it, really sorry. Because she doesn't want... Well, I'm skipping ahead a little bit there. Robert does get on a new suit and go, and the interview looks like it's going to be alright. He's introduced to Agent Garfield, played by Sam Anderson, which the most notable role that I found of his in his IMDb was the principal in Forrest Gump. If you guys don't remember that character, you might remember his dialogue. Is there a Mr. Gump? Mrs. Gump? That's right, that guy. Which is interesting to see him play that one. I'm like, I never realized that was him. But I guess because he added a little bit of that southern drawl to his voice, whereas here, if there's any type of accents, it's very, very subdued. Now, everything looks like it's going to go good. And then Agent Garfield reads a fax from Marie. And she's trying to apologize and explain everything to it. And what sells it is the look on Brad's face when he's reading it, because he's a deer in the headlights. And one of my favorite little comedic moments in this one is when it looks like the letter's done, and then Robert tries to say something, and then Garfield's like, P.S. Oh, God. As if the scene couldn't get more awkward. There's that. It's like, ask him to forgive me. Then once he's done reading, please forgive your mother. Now, there's a lot of good moments in this episode. We cut back to Ray and Deborah's house, and before I get into it, like I mentioned earlier, the one scene, if you can narrow it down to one scene in the episode where Brad earns it, this is it. I mean, he earns it all throughout it, but if you can narrow it down to one scene just from a comedic, with a little bit of drama standpoint, it would be this moment. Because once he walks in with the door open and he's looking at him like, you can definitely tell there's murder behind those eyes when he sees his mother. How'd your interview go? Come here, let me tell you about it. And he goes off on her. It starts slowly, like he's really constraining his anger, and the way that Brad carries himself, you can definitely tell he's really going with his anger, like, you had to ruin my lucky suit, the most important day of my life earlier. Now to this is like, he looked at me like I was a pathetic candy-ass mama's boy. And there's one little reference here that I never really got when I was younger. Now watching him, like, oh, now I really get this implication even more. I mean, I got the whole message of the scene, but now getting the little reference, mainly because it's also been a couple years since I watched this episode, it makes that a little bit stronger. Where they're going back and forth, like Marie's like, he's awfully critical. And Robert's point is, it's the FBI, Ma. I'm not applying for a job at the Gap. No, Gap store. I didn't really get that with that. But it's a good point. He's applying for a high-profile job, not a store at the mall. And also the other underlying implication, he doesn't have to say it. He says it without saying it. I'm a grown man, not a teenager where you can just interject into my life to try to help me just to make yourself feel better. Let me do my stuff my way. Don't interfere. Which, of course, saying it that way would probably just get Marie to argue more, because she always tries to interject like, hey, these are my kids, I can keep interfering. Which I do get, because even when your kids are grown, you never stop parenting. But you gotta learn boundaries. And that's one thing, as we've seen time and again throughout the show, and we'll continue to see in the future, Marie just does not understand. Now, I know they kind of do that soft reboot at the end and beginning of each episode, and it looks like Marie hasn't really learned a lot. But we all know, in real life, by this point, she probably would have been cut off by a lot of family members unless they just go with her toxicity. Because that's right, I do say Marie is a bit of a toxic character, which, keep that in mind. Because 1, 2, 3, 4. For 6 more episodes. In 6 episodes' time, that's really going to come up, because that's when we're going to get that little mini arc I've hinted off and on throughout this season, I believe. Also, last season I brought it up a little bit, which is probably one of the few times where they don't soft reboot everything at the end of an episode. Because when you're doing a serialized little story like that from episode to episode, you can't really do that, especially in a sitcom. And like I mentioned, there are certain things you're not going to soft reboot like that. Deborah tries to interject and calm Robert down, but Robert really shoots it back at her like, you're not going to tell me she doesn't interfere in your life to this level? And she's not a saboteur, because that's what he calls her. And based on what we've seen Marie do in the past, yeah, you can make the argument a bit that she is a saboteur. Now, Deborah tries to calm it down, but then once Robert does this whole little speech, she's like, yeah, but she's not a saboteur. She's just trying to save face a little bit there, but we all know what's going through her head. Yeah, Robert has a point, and then she stops trying to argue with it. Now, in this whole thing, he does a little speech, like, now's your time to rise up, cast off the shackles. Leads to one of my favorite little Ray lines throughout this whole little bit, where he's like, easy there, Spartacus. Now, the thing I mentioned earlier about, the little things about the little jabs at Brad/Robert. This is a moment in the blooper reel where Robert, should I say Brad, flips Ray the bird and is like, it was out in the genitals, it was out in the Peterson Park, and that's what you get. Yeah, you could definitely tell that they either used a different take, or they were able to quickly cut before that and then just included that in the blooper. Now, this whole long scene, I don't want to give every bit of dialogue and every back and forth, but I think I've gotten along the gist of it, is that Robert's going through so many emotions. He's finally venting to Marie about how he feels about how she does all this. I mean, he wants that love from her. It's just that when she decides to show her love, it always is at his expense and always interferes with something and makes him look like a fool. And as he puts her, and he's at the end of the scene, he's like, just stay out of my life. Of course, knowing Marie, not going to happen. And I just love this cut to where it's like, if that's what you want, it's what I want. Cuts to her looking at him. Then quickly cuts, I think the FBI could use my son. She's talking to Agent Garfield. And like I said, one of the first episodes I saw, if there's any scene that you're watching the show out of order that really shows how Marie is as a character when it comes to trying to make things better for her family, especially her sons, it's that moment with that cut, if there's anything that shows it. Now, of course, Agent Garfield, his reaction is kind of how we be feeling just watching her do something like this, the audacity. And how she got in was funny. I don't want to spoil it. And then Agent Garfield does a little interrogation of her, talking with her. And all he's using as evidence is her pattern of behavior plus the note. Now, the thing I like, this is where Marie doing it in handwriting comes back to bite her in the butt. Because Anderson taught handwriting analysis at the academy. And it looks like her hand, she didn't rush it out. If anything, she should have done her first draft and then wrote it quickly to make it look like it was written out in a rush. It was written with a cool and purposeful hand, as he put it. Which I know some people are going to say, well, that's a little pseudoscience-y. Try writing. Use your handwriting. For those of you who still know cursive and all that. Write something slowly and calm, and then write it like you're trying to rush. Now, it might not come out the same way since you're just trying to attempt the rush thing instead of actually doing it. But notice that your strokes are a little different. That's what he's going for. It's like you study enough handwriting like that, you start to notice the difference between someone's writing coolly and when someone's writing in a rush. It's not like stuff like bite pattern analysis and some other weird stuff like that, to where it's like, yeah, there's not really a big amount of science here. Now, Agent Garfield eventually gets Marie in a corner, and he's like, there's something else going on here. And because he brings up everything that's going on, you said the letter embarrassed him, now you're here in person. Now, once he says there's something else going on here, this is the moment that I mentioned at the top where you can see that Doris deserved her Emmy win. This is the moment in this episode, and then you combine it with the big moments from Marie's sculpture, you can see why she won the Emmy here. Just with how she says the first word here. Where you can definitely tell she's trying to remain her composure, and then it comes blurting out. The way Doris plays this, I have to praise her. In that one word, he was supposed to retire, and she's breaking down a little bit. Garfield, sitting there listening to her, because, he got this out here, so he's going to sit there and listen, but in case he does need to, console, he's going to be there. Even if it's just to try to get her out of his office. And she goes mentioning, he's a year away from retiring. I'm sorry I have to laugh a little bit there. Because, there's 3 more seasons of this show, and Robert hasn't retired by the end of season 9. Although it does play a part in one episode then. But we'll get to that one when we get to, I think that's season 8, if I remember right. Well, she's going, now he wants to go from one job to another. How long do I have to go around with a knot in my stomach? Remember that thing I said earlier about mothers? Working security, it's not as stressful as working as a cop. But I can just imagine that when I go, especially since I work one of the busier shifts, that my grandmother probably has the same type of knot in her stomach or whatnot. Especially on the busier days. But I can only imagine what she'd be feeling if it was like that. I know when there's something bad going on outside with weather and all that, she does really worry a lot due to stuff like that. So you just add a more dangerous job on top of it. You can't really blame Marie for worrying. It's just all the stuff in this episode is like all that. And I do like that we do see a little bit of character growth here where she's like, but he wants this job. And we find out that the reason that he's not getting the job isn't because of Marie, or at least not fully. Now, her actions probably threw off Robert a bit to where he didn't do as well in the interview as he should have. And, of course, he might have still gotten the job if his stuff really did vouch for him as a person, which Garfield even knows. She's a fine officer. We just have better candidates for the position. Now, based on Robert's history as a police officer, his commendations, all that, I'd say that the people who are more qualified probably are on equal footing there, but probably also have degrees. You could throw that whole little rant from Lethal Weapon 4 in there. They got all those degrees and all that. Which, even though I've never looked law enforcement, remember I did work at a courthouse before around deputies. I did hear them talk. And it seems like the schooling and whatnot is one thing that makes a lot of the ranked positions competitive. And you go with this, it would probably make going from one law enforcement agency to a higher one that's more federal also competitive. So Robert not getting a 4-year degree out of school definitely is going to work against him in certain regards. If he had any criminology combined with everything, he might not have gotten it still, but he would probably be a little bit more in the running. Now, this annoys Marie, and she does a little rant and all that, which is cut out of the syndication version, so I never saw this little bit until I got the DVD. Now, I'm not going to mention it, but it is a nice little moment. And then she goes to Robert to have a little heart-to-heart with him. And I like how she tries to blow off the fact she went to Agent Garfield and being like, yeah, I just went to a diner. And I was thinking, like, oh, he's right. And the way Brad plays it, she can already tell that he knows the truth. Either he doesn't believe her or he already knows the truth. Having watched the episode, I already know which one it is, so I'm analyzing it backwards. But it's one of those ones like, which one is it? And then once he says it, you're like, oh, he already knows. He called. Then a little heart-to-heart here. It's nice, like, you told me how you feel about my job. Well, I'm sorry, but I was like, alright, it doesn't matter. Nice little heart-to-heart moment with him. Now, the epilogue scene is definitely the epilogue this episode needed, where they're all waiting to watch Ray's show. Now, this ties back into one joke I did not mention in the middle one, where Robert goes off, when he's going off, he mentions, like, everyone there's below him. Little Prince Raymond, heir to the throne, Peter being the court jester and him being the serf. And he comes back up again with this. And, of course, to tie into it a little bit, one of the twins made Robert a lucky hat because he heard about his lucky suit. Now, it looks like it's not going to be much, but then something, at least that's lucky for Robert, happens because the show that Ray was going to be on is postponed due to election coverage. And I just love how he takes the hat off, looks at it like, So luck is shining on Robert a little bit. Perfect ending for this episode. Now, as you can tell how I'm gushing about it, this is one of my favorite episodes of the season, and it was also one of my favorite episodes in general. So, if you guys want to see me talk about a video style, you can always go to the Raymond video I did years ago. # shameless plug. Obviously, I had to go beat by beat for this one. Definitely a good episode if you're not watching these episodes in order. Like if you're doing a VHS list, but you're doing it out of order, this is a good one to show your friends if you're trying to introduce them to the characters and all that, and definitely show how Marie is as a butt-in person. I know I've said that a couple times, but just that one little cut. Even if you don't want to show them the whole episode, just show them that one little transition, and they'll get the character like that. Now, I'm looking at the future episodes, and with maybe probably one exception, most of these next ones are ones I never find myself skipping. That shows how good season 6 is, especially at this point. The other one, it's only a skip if I'm not in the mood to watch it, and that's 3 episodes from this one. Of course, the next one, we've all talked. Actually, this episode after that, excuse me. Next episode's another good one, and it's relationship versus relationship. And of course, that's going to be Skit. Till next time, guys.